Hello everyone. I realized that since I've been doing these videos that I'm jumping around quite a bit as far as philosophies and religions and scriptures go. And so I wanted to share with you kind of a sight map, as it were, of spiritual life as I've kind of collected over the last 20 years, sort of a perspective on things. So I'll start at the top. The highest realization for what I think that I'm looking for in this life, and certainly one that I've gleaned from the sages, is that there's this knowledge that there is one without a second, that everything is God, if you want to put it in that language. This one reality without a second, and whose nature is love, existence, and intelligence absolute, unchanging, perfected. That's the impersonal God. And really, you're not even allowed to describe him or her or that. Usually they refer to it as something you're pointing at, that. Thou art that. And so that's the highest understanding of reality. That's the highest realization, as it were. And in talking about all of these things, really, language spoils all of it. You know, one of the famous sayings of Ramakrishna is that God is the one thing that cannot be made impure by the tongue. You know, the tongue cannot describe him. You cannot put a limit of any adjective on him at all, or her, or that. And so we're all striving to know that nature, the nature of reality, why we are, what we are, who we are, how we are, all of that. And the sages since the beginning, since the earliest of our scriptures, have said that all the paths lead to the divine, and that all religions are true within that context. But no one religion alone is true, as it were. They describe truth, or this religion, this eternal quest, this eternal dharma, the Sanatana Dharma, to be a gem, a beautiful gem, and each of the paths or religions is a facet of that gem. And each religion can enjoy the luster of the whole gem, can enjoy the beauty of the whole gem, and represent the beauty of the whole gem. But no one perspective is the whole gem. The gem simply cannot be encapsulated in the human mind. And so that's the perspective, and that's the kind of set of ideals that I'm looking at. Now, the sages have said, also from the beginning, that there is so far has been four paths that have ended with this realization, that have given the people who practiced them these insights, realization, understanding, perspective, whatever word you want to give to it. There's four paths. And all of the religions of the world generally fall into one of these four paths, very interestingly. The most recognized path is Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. And in the path of devotion, you see God as a personal God, and you relate to him personally, or her personally. Usually there's an incarnation of God involved, you know, whether God is incarnated as a Krishna or a Rama or a Jesus or a Buddha. And it's through the relationship, the grace and the love and the teachings of that highest ideal that you come to this realization of your oneness, you know, that this divine marriage, this divine union happens, to put it in Catholic speak, as it were. And so Christianity is a great representation of the Bhakti tradition, as is Islam, as is some forms of Hinduism. Now, the second path that they found is the path of action. And in the path of action, the ideal is to be perfectly set in this moment, and everything that you do is done for the sake of the beloved, without any consideration of its other fruit. You know, you don't go to work to get a paycheck. You go to work, and what you're doing in this moment at work is your worship, your offering to that divinity, however you've perceived of it. And it's given as an offering, and so it's done with great care and great love. But you don't do it with an eye to getting something in return for it. It really does plant you here in the here and now, brings about that awareness. The third path is the path of Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. And this path is basically asking the question, who am I? Who is it in here, in this contraption called a body? Who is it that wants to know the truth? Who is it that's looking for the answers? Who is it, or what is it, that is looking at my mind, interpreting my thoughts? What is it that's listening to the music of my ears and making sense of it? What is it that's feeling and experiencing this life through this body, that's watching all of these changes? And so it's a set of practices and principles for that investigation, for going in and finding out what your nature is, who you are. The fourth path is the path of Raja Yoga, the path of meditation, the royal path. And this path works under the idea that like a mountain lake, when it's perfectly serene, there's not a single ripple in it, and the full moon is reflected in that lake, you can see the whole moon perfectly reflected. There's no question as to what it is. You can see it there. But when that lake is disturbed, when that lake has lots of ripples in it, you see lots of white shards, and the moon looks like it's become multiple and various changing shapes and very caught in time, as it were. And so it's a set of practices in meditation where the idea is, if you are able to get control of the mind to the extent that you can hold a single thought, the idea is that when the mind is completely and perfectly still, God can be plainly seen, can be clearly recognized. The nature of the universe is obviously set before you like the reflection of the unchanging moon. So it's like the idea is being able to control your thoughts to the point that when one thought ends, before that next thought begins, as it were, in that interstitial space there, God is clearly seen. You will have your realization. You will recognize and know the nature of the universe. So those are the four paths. Now, it has been a very popular idea that these paths are distinct and separate from each other, but more of the contemporary idea, really spearheaded, I would say, by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and Holy Mother, is this idea that one of those paths will predominate in you according to your nature, and it's between you and your work and your guru to kind of figure out what path is going to be the most effective for you. Now, as a pointer, Sri Ramakrishna says in this day and age, with the way the world is put together, the fastest and most effective path is the path of devotion, the path of bhakti yoga. The other ones can be done, certainly. But the idea now is more the idea that you have one that predominates in you. Like, I love devotion. I love the singing. I love, praying to God. I love the relationship, the idea of companionship with this eternal being. It really fits into my psyche. But there's a part of me, too, that wants to be, if I can say it playfully, more adult, not really have an imaginary friend as such. And that side is this Jnani side. And so I also like that idea of that perspective, that doing the work to find out who is it that really wants to know. Who's relating with who here? Who's talking to who in this mind? And I find that very attractive. And so what I wanted to clarify is, if you're going to practice devotion, which is the recommended of Sri Ramakrishna anyway, how do you use jnana? Now, I've brought this issue up before, but yesterday when we were looking at the idea of freedom, and they were saying, it hold no interest in the mind, how do you use that as a devotional person, without having to undo and completely dismantle your idea of God and the beloved and all of that sweet poetry that you've developed around that idea that warms your heart and soul? And so for me, when I look at that, I thought that's really what I wanted to share. When I look at that idea, how does it break down? Whenever a jnani, somebody on the path of knowledge, speaks and they talk about this I am, this being within you, their emphasis is on that being the real you, which is the point of the path of knowledge. From the devotional perspective, what they're talking about is your beloved, your divine companion. His perfection, his isness, his love, his intelligence, his mercy, his grace, his constant presence and awareness and being. That is the highest ideal. And for the jnani, that's the I. That's the I of all eyes. That's deep within. That's the one that you are trying to realize. And the jnani doesn't want to spend any time identifying with what we normally, with real life as we see it, real life, where I'm a person, I'm a man, and I'm this old, and I'm doing this, and involved in this idea. And so you have to understand when the Gyani speaks of that I am, that unchanging self, he's talking about your beloved. And when he's talking about the one who needs to be ignored, the one that's making all the noise in the mind, the one that's just an arrangement of thoughts, limitations and restrictions, that poor soul is you. It's the devotee, the person who's trying to relate to this perfect being, this ideal, this one who ultimately will be without a second. And so you see that and kind of understand that. And Ramakrishna says, take that knowledge of oneness and just kind of tie it in the corner of your cloth, as it were. Put it in your pocket. Just hold on to it. It's very important to do that, he said, because it will keep you from becoming a fanatic. It'll keep you from thinking that your wife is the most beautiful wife and that your wife is the wife that everybody should have. Having that Gyanic perspective firmly wrapped in your pocket will kind of keep you open and understanding that to each of us, our wives, our partners, our beloveds, are for each of us the best and the only and the greatest and the most wonderful, in the ideal, of course. There's some tragic souls out there who are in horrible relationships and suffering through them, but that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? Anyway, that's the sight map of what we're talking about and how I like to move amongst all of the different religions. It's good to find a center. It's important. It's actually, you absolutely must find a center. And I would encourage you to find a teacher. Otherwise, your ego is your teacher, and your ego just takes what it likes, which will help it to maintain itself very nicely, but it will not take the challenges that will dismantle it so that you get a perspective of the one without a second. So try and be open to the idea of having a teacher. Yes, there is the inner teacher, and all teachers are representative of that inner teacher, but until the toddler in your mind is quiet enough to let the teacher say something or to be heard, we need an adult in the room, as it were, to smack the toddler of the mind around a little bit and get him to quiet down and sit quietly and to eat his beets while the teacher speaks. So that's the general picture that I'm working with, that I'm playing with and developing. It's always in development. So if I say something, kind of see it in that context. And if you ever have a question or a challenge or another idea, wonderful, and please share it. I'm always interested in hearing them.